This is a Buttercup squash. It's one of the fall squashes, and they're usually kind of round or globe shaped. Sometimes they're a little flatter than this one I have here, and they can be either green or like this one has a little bit of orange on it, but most of the time they're green, at least the ones that I've seen. And these are not to be confused with their cousin, the butternut squash. Quite a bit of difference, actually. They're both squashes, so yeah, they're a little bit similar, but Buttercup has much more velvety texture when it's cooked than a butternut. But back to the Buttercup squash. Because of its round shape like that, it's pretty difficult to peel before it's cooked. So the way I like to do it is to cook it first and then scoop the cooked flesh out of the skin. And the way I'm going to do that here is just cut it in half. And these squashes are very tough, and this can be kind of dangerous to cut it in half like this, so be careful. Potentially maybe even get some kitchen towels to surround the squash while you cut it to keep it from slipping and sliding on the countertop or rolling away. But I've done this quite a few times, so I'm pretty comfortable with it. And I just got to get that knife started by kind of hitting it with the butt of my hand like a hammer. And I'll make one little cut partway through the squash and then rotate the squash and just keep doing that around until I get things going. You can skip this step and cook the squash whole and cut it later after it's softened. But this just would take a really long time to cook that way. That's why I cut it in half like this. But that really is the most difficult part of this recipe, is getting that squash cut in half without cutting your fingers off. And there are quite a lot of seeds inside these Buttercup squash. I'm going to go ahead and remove those with the spoon. I find it works the best to just go around the outside and just do it slowly and carefully rather than just diving in and throwing seeds everywhere. I find that just doing it slowly and carefully and just pulling all that seed bundle out all in one big hunk seems to work the best, makes the least mess. And if you're interested in growing your own squash, these seeds in these grocery store squashes are perfectly good. You can plant them in your garden or your yard and grow your own squash if you want to. And after the seeds are all cleaned out, then I've got this nice big bowl-shaped squash here. And for the stem end of the squash, I'm going to cut off that little bit of the squash that has the stem there so it'll sit level on the pan while it cooks. Now, I'm not going to add any seasoning or oil or anything. I'm just going to wrap these two squash halves in aluminum foil. And I'm not going to wrap them super tightly. I just want them tight enough so that it can steam, but I want to make an organized fold here so that it's easy to unfold later when it's piping hot. So it would be wise to not wad up the foil real tightly into a ball on the top to fold it neatly. It'll make it easier to open at the end. And these are going to go into a 400-degree oven, and it's going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to cook these squash. And since these do take quite a long time to cook, I'm getting this dinner started at about 4:30 in the afternoon to have dinner at 6:30. So it's just something to think about if you're making this dish. That you want to get these squashes in the oven plenty ahead of time before you intend to eat. So I've let those squashes cook for about an hour and went and did something else, and now I'm going to come back and get the other ingredients started here. This is some Italian sausage. This is my favorite meat to use in this recipe. You could use ground beef or pork, but that sausage, the spices in that sausage is what really gives this dish some really good flavor. And I'm not putting any oil in the pan. The fat content of the sausage is high enough that it's going to create its own oil here once it starts heating up. And while that sausage is browning, I'm going to go ahead and chop up an onion and a couple of apples. I think these are Sweet Tango apples, just happen to be the ones we had in the fridge. Doesn't really matter what kind of apple, but I am going to peel the apples. You probably could leave the skin on if you wanted to, they might get a little tough. But I've diced these apples into about half-inch size cubes. I want them to cook relatively quickly. Apples can take a long time to cook if they're in big chunks. That sausage is starting to brown. I'm going to go ahead and break that up with my favorite potato masher. And if you want to freak out in the comments about me using a metal potato masher on this pan, go for it. The masher is not actually ever touching the pan. It's just mashing down on the meat. So if that gets you uptight, just relax. In goes the apples and the onions. I'm just going to mix that up real quick and put the lid on, and we're just going to cook that for about 10 minutes or so till those onions and apples get softened. And after a few minutes, I'm going to add a little bit of spices, just a tiny bit of salt. The sausage is pretty salty, so I don't want to over salt it. Just a tiny bit of salt. I'm going to add some pepper, and I'm also going to add some garlic powder to this. And also a little bit of sage. Feel free to add whatever spices that feel like fall to you. This is kind of a fall dish, so add whatever spices that you think would be good. And about a total of 15 minutes or so, and those apples and onions are softened. And I'm going to go ahead and add the spinach. A lot of times I like to use kale for this, but right now kale's out of season. My garden is done for the year, and my indoor kale has not started coming in yet. So spinach is what it's going to be today. Frozen spinach will work good too. Just got to wring out the water real well from that frozen spinach before putting it in. But this spinach is only going to take about 5 minutes to wilt down. Then I'll take the lid off and just get that all mixed up. Lid goes on and burner goes off, and that's just going to sit there and stay hot while I check on the squash. It has been an hour and a half in the oven there, and this squash should be done. I'm just going to use a spoon and a tongs to carefully open the foil pack here, and I'm going to test it with a fork to make sure it's done. That fork should easily slide all the way through the flesh of that squash. If the flesh of that squash is not completely soft, I would wrap it back up and put it back in the oven for another 20 minutes or so until it's completely soft. One of my favorite things about Buttercup squash is its very velvety texture when it's cooked, and if it's undercooked, you're not going to get that. So I like to make sure it's cooked all the way through. You absolutely could eat it if it's still a little al dente. Like I said, you're just not going to get that velvety texture, that's all. The flavor will still be there. But this squash is cooked to perfection, and so I'm just going to take that spoon and just scoop out that flesh out of the squash, scoop it away from the skin, and put it into a casserole dish here. You might be thinking, why wouldn't you just dump the sausage and the apples and onion mix just into the bowl of the squash and eat it like that? And you probably could. You could do that. You probably just need to eat it right out of the foil pack there, because if you try to pick it up and move it or put it on a plate or something, it would just fall apart because it's so soft. But I prefer to scoop it out and put it in a casserole dish like this. It makes it a lot easier for serving and portioning and leftovers as well. And I'm going to spread that squash around the bottom of the casserole dish nice and evenly. And I'm going to dump that whole mixture of sausage, apples and onions and spinach on top. Spread that around evenly again. We're kind of making a layered casserole here. And the top layer is going to be cheddar cheese. This is shredded cheddar cheese. And that's going to go back into the 400-degree oven, and everything in here is cooked. All we're doing is melting and browning the cheese on top. It's only going to take about 10 minutes. And here's the finished product. As you can see, the cheese on top got nice and melted and brown, and this is piping hot right out of the oven. I like to let this sit for like a minimum of like 5 minutes or so, just to let it settle a little bit and cool a little bit so you don't burn your face off when you take your first bite. Time to serve it up. This really is kind of a meal in and of itself. But tonight I'm having this with a piece of wheat toast and a dill pickle and a little pat of butter on top to melt there. It really takes it to the next level. So there it is, the Buttercup squash, sausage and apple casserole. This is my absolute favorite way to eat Buttercup squash. Thanks for watching, I appreciate it. See you on the next one.